Today we're going to be looking at a poem from the Power and Conflict cluster. We're going to be looking at Tissue by Imtiaz Dharker. It should have been called Paper. This whole poem should have been called Paper. What is the poem about? It's a really good question because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what Tissue's about. Look, I can't lie. I love poetry. I love finding meanings. I love thinking of interpretations. But with Tissue, I really do struggle. However, if it comes up in your exam, we have to be able to write something about it. The speaker in this poem uses paper as an extended metaphor for life. The poet looks at how paper can alter things and change the way we live our lives, and paper controls us to some extent, which is quite interesting. She gives examples of the pages of religious books, like in the Quran, for example, or receipts, money, maps, architect drawings. Each of these items is connected to the most important aspects of our lives, the journeys that we make, maps, the structure of our home. So if we're going with this idea of tissue paper being an extended metaphor for humans, Dharker is showing that tissue paper is fragile, but it also has a lot of power, just like human beings. They are fragile, but they have the power to change things. Let's read it. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching. The kind you find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died, where and how, on which sepia date, pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. If buildings were paper, I might feel their drift, see how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift in the direction of the wind. Maps too. The sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. Find slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold and what was paid by credit cards. Might fly our lives like paper kites. An architect could use all this, place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line, and never wish to build again with brick or block, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths, through the shapes that pride can make, find a way to trace a grand design with living tissue, raise a structure never meant to last, of paper smoothed and stroked and thinned to be transparent, turned into your skin. Right, I've read this for a lot of years and it just doesn't get any easier. I'm so sorry that you have to do this, but if this comes up in your exam, we have to be able to say some interesting things about it. I'm going to take you through bit by bit of this poem, try to explain what's happening, and along the way, I'll pick out key quotations. So I'll pick out quotations that have language devices or interesting words that you can zoom into. So if this poem comes up in your exam, you are able to write at least 3 detailed, analytical paragraphs about it. Let's do this. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. So I think this line is referring to the fact that paper can be thin, so it lets the light shine through, and it's easy to destroy, yet it has the power to alter things. So there's juxtaposition going on here. So if we're linking that back to paper being a microcosm for human life, it's saying human life can be fragile, but it also has the power to change and reshape things. I guess in a way, society can be viewed as tissue, hear me out, because it's made from a collection of cells and is intrinsically fragile, but it could also become more like tissue by becoming more flexible. Society should be more like tissue. Now, this quotation has religious connotations because in Christianity, it says that Jesus is the light of the world. And also in Islam, the Quran states that Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. So therefore, light symbolizes God and purity. And if paper is letting the light shine through, it's saying you can find God through paper. So paper is being given this divine status. Then it says paper thinned by age or touching. So it's saying paper doesn't last forever. It loses power over time when it is used too much. So Dharker is warning people about being too reliant on paper and material things. We shouldn't focus every part of our lives on paper and be fixed in our ideologies. Paper here could be seen also as a metaphor for human tissue, which deteriorates as the years pass when we get older and it eventually ages and dies. So eventually everything we think is so important now will fade and die and not exist anymore. It's saying this life is transient. However, because she's saying paper can be thinned over time if you touch it too much, she could be implying that we actually need to look after ourselves and we need to cherish life because it can so easily be destroyed. She says, the kind you find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died where and how, on which sepia date. This is probably one of the quotations you should analyze in your exam, so we should copy it down. Well-used books emphasizes how religious texts can form the foundations on which a person or a whole society chooses to live their lives. We all follow what this one book says. It calibrates their moral compass and they return to that book for reassurance, for hope. The reference to the Quran is talking about the Muslim holy book, and there's asyndetic listing used here to emphasize that listing the significance of the Quran and religious books on humanity. It also connotes that we don't actually have any control over our lives. Our futures, all the little details, who we're gonna marry, when we're gonna die, who we're gonna be born to, all of that has been written for us. So we have no power in this world. It's really interesting that Dharker has chosen to name Islam by linking it to paper. I personally find this interpretation quite offensive as a Muslim, but I will share it with you anyway. Perhaps she is implicitly criticizing some people's extremist actions, which is rooted in or stems from mere paper. So it could be linking to terrorist acts and showing the futility of such violence. She's implying that religion is just a social construct. It's just paper, written by a hand. And if people see that, perhaps they will be able to make better choices, better independent decisions. Also, sepia is like a chemical filter that was used by early photographers back in the day to preserve the image. And it's currently used in photography to imitate old pictures. You know when you put a filter on a photo and it turns all like brownie, that's sepia. And the use of that symbol implies that some of these dependencies we have on paper are really old-fashioned and archaic. It then says, pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. We can analyze this quotation. The verb stroking is an affectionate and tender action. So religion is valued by people. And there's sibilance in this quotation, which conveys how religious books bring people peace. But then that juxtaposes with the dental plosive alliteration, which shows how religion can also cause divisions and conflict. So it's kind of showing that duality of religion. The fact that the book turns transparent only after you have given it attention, so only when you take the time to study religion, you are able to see the true meanings and interpretations of the messages. Otherwise, there's a danger of taking lines out of context. Now, the polysyndeton, the repetition of and, implies how long a person should spend studying these things in detail, studying religion in detail, before giving it such significance. The plural nature of pages, lots of them, pages, suggests a large content to study. The pages have been smoothed and stroked, and maybe that's another criticism that people have given the words in these religious books meanings that suit their own interpretations, and they have glossed over any darker or more negative bits. She then says, if buildings were paper, I might feel their drift, seeing how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift in the direction of the wind. Buildings being made from paper suggests that society is fragile. It implies how delicately balanced civilization is. Like just a sigh or a change in the wind's direction can cause society to fall away. The change in direction of the wind could mean that one change in the public's view or a single decision made by the government could change everything. Looking at buildings and how easily they fall away also again relates to terrorism. 9/11, buildings falling away, like when the Twin Towers fell. So this actually links to the fact that this poem belongs to Dharker's collection called Terrorist at My Table. And it's like Dharker seems to be in a somber and reflective mood and is contemplating if buildings were made out of paper, more wars and attacks would occur and people's homes would be demolished really easily. So I guess we're really lucky that we don't use paper in architecture, at least, and that buildings are safe and stable, mashallah. She then starts listing the things that are made from paper. So she first says, maps too. The sun shines through their borderlines. The marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain falls. So paper literally and metaphorically shows us the direction in which we should go. All divisions are only paper. We have created the maps, we drew them, we decided this is this country, this is this country, we did that. So actually this is a message of unity in the poem. It's saying that if the sun can shine through the borders, why can't we? Maps and territories, all of these things create divisions instead of freedom. And then the natural borders, the rivers, the mountain folds, can represent the obstacles we have to face and overcome to become a truly ideal, transparent society. She then goes and talks about fine slips from grocery shops. So that's receipts, slips that you get from grocery shops. And it says that say how much was sold, what was paid by credit card, might fly our lives like paper kites. Because there's a simile here, I think we should analyze it. She talks about fine slips, receipts, and how they keep a record of financial transactions made in society. Just like receipts are physically flimsy though, they're temporary, chuck a receipt away, the significance of money and wealth in our lives is equally flimsy and ephemeral. The reference to credit cards is a reminder of the burdens that we live in to pay for our day-to-day bills. But then that simile where she says, fly our lives like paper kites, it shows how easy it would be to remove materialism away from our lives. Let it fly away, let that money go, let it fly away like a kite. Once we realize that actually all of this is just paper, we'll be able to let it go more easily. Kites need the wind to fly. They can't fly without wind. So even nature is on the side of this release and liberation. There's an inclusive pronoun, our, and that really creates this sense of community. Dharker is giving advice in a really familiar and personal way, like she is in harmony with her readers. So I guess this stanza overall is a symbol of capitalism. In the next section, she talks about the power of paper when it's placed in piles, one over the other. She says an architect could use all this, place layer over layer, script over numbers over line, and wish never to build again with brick or block, but let daylight break through, so on. The layer over layer is a metaphor that a fragile and weak thing like paper could become strong enough to be compared to a brick if they were put together, if they were united. So that's Dharker's way of calling for unity and brotherhood as a means of creating change in society. When we're by ourselves, we're just paper. We're weak, we're nothing. But if we come together, we're strong, we're a brick. She says, find a way to trace a grand design with living tissue, raise a structure never meant to last, of paper smoothed and stroked and thin to be transparent, and then she ends with turn into your skin. So finally, she reaches the conclusion that even we, human beings, are nothing more than tissue. The grand design could be a reference to God's design. As in Genesis, it says, we are traced with living tissue made in the image of God. So the last line suggests that our grand designs and our plans and our skin are ultimately synonymous. It's the same thing because all of us are fragile. Nothing we create lasts forever. So if everything in this world is paper, our systems, our buildings, our religions, our knowledge, then this means that if we wanted to, we can create systems that are better suited to our society and not rely on older systems that are of the past and may be obsolete now. We will all die soon, so we should be humble and remind ourselves that we are nothing more than paper, tissue paper. I'm gonna wrap this up now. Do you see what I did there? I wanted to talk about structure. Structurally, this poem is written in sustained quatrains, 4-line stanzas. Yeah, every stanza is 4 lines, but in the final single line breaks the quatrains, reflecting this life as whole, unpredictable and disorganized. No matter how we try to impose order, it shows how sudden and unpredictable death is. Now, it's worth noting that at the time this poem was written, the poet's partner was slowly passing away with cancer. So the theme of the fragility of life is relevant given this context. And speaking of context, hopefully tissue makes a bit more sense to you now, and you have a few quotations that you could probably zoom into and analyze, but that's not enough. In your exam, you also need to bring in context. And what that means is explain what was going on during the time the poem was written or what was happening in the poet's life, and then link that to the message of the poem. Like, why did the poet even write this poem? Some interesting context points for tissue are: Imtiaz Dharker was born in Pakistan, but grew up in Glasgow and describes herself as Scottish, Pakistani, Muslim, Calvinist. Most of her poetry concentrates on identity, and maybe that's why she explores the idea of maps and moving between countries and borders in this poem. This poem comes from her 2006 collection, The Terrorist at My Table, which is focused on global politics, terrorism, extremism, religion, and fundamentalism. Tissue is actually the first poem in the collection, so it acts as a preface to explore the source of fundamentalism and the way humans abuse power. That is why one of the main messages of this poem is that humans don't have the right attitude to life. We see life as permanent and an opportunity to gain power, but really our life is transient and temporary, just like tissue paper. And perhaps Dharker wanted to reflect this view in her poetry because she saw her husband suffer with cancer for 11 years before dying of it. And there you have it, a full analysis of tissue. I hope that makes you feel a little bit confident with analysing tissue and understanding it. If you found this video helpful, give it a like and don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series.